The truth hit me like a freight train on my 60th birthday. 3 decades of sacrifice, a husband with a secret family, and a terminal diagnosis giving me just 6 months to live. Some might call it a perfect storm, but I call it my awakening. My name is Eleanor Wilson, and after spending my entire life as everyone's doormat, I finally decided it was time to stand up. That evening should have been special. I'd prepared an elaborate dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and a fresh garden salad, dishes everyone loved. My grandson Tyler had just started 3rd grade, and coincidentally, it was also my birthday. But as my son Michael unveiled the cake reading only "Congratulations, Tyler," I felt the familiar sting of invisibility. No one remembered my birthday, despite my gentle reminders in the previous days. The breaking point came when Tyler dropped his fork and demanded I fetch him another one. "Tyler, you can do that yourself," I said calmly, surprising everyone with my uncharacteristic refusal. My husband George glared at me while my daughter-in-law Rebecca sweetly asked where the silverware was kept. My son quickly assured her, "Mom will take care of it." That was the moment everything changed. Instead of heading to the kitchen, I walked straight to our bedroom and began packing. For 30 years, I'd endured George's drunken rages and financial neglect, while he squandered his modest income on poker nights. I quietly built a successful food stall at the farmer's market, saving every penny. I stayed in this loveless marriage believing I was protecting Michael from a broken home. My upbringing had taught me that divorce was shameful, especially for women. But with a cancer diagnosis giving me just months to live, I suddenly realized how precious time truly was. "I want a divorce," I announced when I returned to the dining room, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. The room fell silent before George exploded. "Have you lost your mind? You're nearly 70. Michael immediately sided with his father, asking what people would think of us divorcing at our age. Rebecca, ever the manipulator, grabbed my arm tearfully, using Tyler as emotional leverage. "What about Tyler? Who's going to look after him? Don't you care about your grandson?" Their collective attempt to guilt me into staying only strengthened my resolve. "You're both in your 30s, I snapped at Rebecca and Michael. "Isn't Tyler your responsibility? I've watched you play this perfect daughter-in-law act for years. Aren't you tired? Because I sure as hell am. Starting today, I'm done being everyone's mother, grandmother, and wife. I'm living for myself." When they blocked my exit, I decided to unleash the truth I'd been harboring. "Did you know your father has another family?" I asked Michael pointedly. George's face drained of color as I continued. "Her name is Susan. She lives at 113B Lincoln Street, apartment 302. Your father has a 31-year-old son with her, your half-brother, who's married with a daughter of his own." And I discovered this devastating truth at the grocery store just weeks earlier. There stood George, carrying shopping bags for a well-dressed woman his age, while a little girl called them Grandma and Grandpa. Meanwhile, I was sweating through my shirt, struggling with a heavy cart. The contrast between his 2 lives, treating us as burdens while playing the devoted family man elsewhere, ignited something in me. I confronted him there in the store, causing a scene that Rebecca happened to witness. Later, I learned the awful truth: George had been with Susan since before Michael was born. He had divided his life and finances between 2 families for over 30 years, with me unknowingly subsidizing both households through my food stall earnings. As I stood firm in my decision to leave, I realized that my cancer diagnosis wasn't a death sentence, but a wake-up call. I'd spent 60 years putting everyone else first. Now, with whatever time I had left, I would finally place myself at the center of my own life. The family who had taken me for granted for decades would have to learn to survive without their convenient scapegoat and unpaid housekeeper. Sometimes it takes losing everything to find yourself. That night, as I closed the door on my past, I opened another to a future filled with possibilities I never dared imagine. My life wasn't ending at 60, it was finally beginning. I never imagined that at age 60, I would discover the elaborate web of lies that had entangled my 3-decade marriage. My husband, George, didn't just have an affair. He had constructed an entire parallel life with another woman, complete with a 31-year-old son I never knew existed, and a granddaughter who called him Grandpa with the same innocent trust as my own grandson, Tyler. The revelation shattered not just my heart, but the very foundation of everything I believed about our life together. The pieces began falling into place that fateful afternoon at Wilson's Grocery on Maple Street. I was struggling with an overloaded cart, my arthritic fingers aching from the weight, when I spotted him across the produce section. There stood George, attentively following a silver-haired woman with elegant clothes and carefully maintained appearance, everything about her screaming the comfort my frugal existence had never known. Beside them skipped a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7, her pigtails bouncing as she turned to them both. "Grandma," she called to the woman, before beaming up at my husband. "Grandpa," and the tenderness in George's eyes as he looked at them was an expression I hadn't seen directed at me or our family in decades. My shopping cart clattered to the floor, apples rolling across the linoleum as years of silent resentment erupted from deep within me. I confronted him right there between the cereal aisle and dairy section, creating the kind of public scene I'd spent my entire life avoiding. Shoppers stopped to stare, some even recording the confrontation on their phones. But shame was the furthest thing from my mind. "Where has our money gone all these years?" I demanded, gripping his collar with trembling hands. Later, after Rebecca had witnessed the grocery store meltdown and the truth could no longer be contained, I learned the full extent of George's betrayal. This wasn't some midlife crisis or recent indiscretion. He had been seeing Susan since before our son Michael was born. Each time he'd disappear after drinking, claiming he was entertaining clients. He was simply returning to his other home. The modest paycheck that barely covered our basic necessities wasn't being squandered solely on poker nights as I'd believed. It was building a life with his second family. It turned out every time he vanished for a few days after drinking, he wasn't out entertaining clients like he claimed. He was simply going back to their home. I explained to Carol, my only true friend, as we sat on her porch swing the day after I'd walked out. It turned out most of the money he earned over the years didn't go into our household at all. It went into building a life with them. The financial betrayal cut as deeply as the emotional one. While I pinched pennies, ran a food stall at the farmer's market in all-weather conditions, and made do with second-hand everything, George had been quietly selling off family properties to finance his other life. The modest inheritance from his parents, land that could have secured Michael's future or our retirement, had been liquidated without my knowledge. I learned he had recently sold the last remaining plots when Susan's son needed money for a down payment on a home of his own. What hurt most was realizing that the financial strain that had defined our family's existence, Michael going without lunch money, our ancient appliances held together with duct tape and prayers, the constant anxiety about making ends meet had been entirely unnecessary. We hadn't been poor, we had been robbed. Every time George barked, "Ask your mother," when Michael needed something, it wasn't because we couldn't afford it. It was because his financial priorities lay elsewhere. The woman who had shared my husband for 30 years, even had the audacity to suggest I should be grateful for her compromise, that she was fine with me remaining the legal wife while she continued as his second family. The casual cruelty of this proposal, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed they held the moral high ground, left me speechless. How delusional must someone be to lecture the betrayed spouse about dignity? Standing in our living room that evening, suitcase in hand, I felt something beyond anger or heartbreak. I felt liberation. The financial struggles that had defined my existence hadn't been inevitable. They had been imposed on me through decades of calculated deception. My husband hadn't just stolen my trust. He had stolen opportunities, security, and comfort that should have been mine and my son's birthright. As I walked away from 30 years of lies, I understood that George's financial betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the systematic diminishment of my worth. But at 60, with nothing left to lose, I was finally ready to reclaim everything that had been taken from me, starting with my freedom. The most painful realization at 60 wasn't discovering my husband's double life. It was finally acknowledging how little I mattered to the family I had sacrificed everything for. After decades of putting everyone else first, I had become less a person than a function: the cook, the cleaner, the babysitter, the emotional punching bag. No one saw me anymore. I was Eleanor Wilson, but to my family, I might as well have been a piece of furniture, useful when needed, ignored when not. My birthday dinner laid this truth bare with brutal clarity. I'd spent hours in the kitchen preparing everyone's favorites: golden brown roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, baked mac and cheese with that perfect crispy top, and a fresh garden salad. Not because anyone had asked me to, but because that's what I'd always done: anticipate needs, smooth rough edges, create comfort for others while expecting none for myself. When my grandson Tyler dropped his fork and imperiously commanded, "Grandma, go get me another one," I felt something shift inside me. I remained seated and calmly replied, "Tyler, you can do that yourself." The shock on everyone's face was almost comical, as if the toaster had suddenly developed an opinion. My husband George glared at me from across the table, while my daughter-in-law Rebecca immediately jumped in with her saccharine smile. "Eleanor, where do you keep the extra silverware? I'll grab one for him." Before I could answer, my son Michael casually waved her off with, "Mom will take care of it. You don't need to." The dismissive certainty in his voice, the absolute confidence that I existed to serve, was the final straw. I stood up, but instead of heading to the kitchen to fetch the precious fork, I walked straight to our bedroom and began packing. For years, I'd been the invisible foundation upon which their comfortable lives were built. When George drank himself into destructive rages, I silently repaired what he broke, both physically and emotionally. When he contributed next to nothing financially, I ran a food stall at the farmer's market to make up the difference, saving every spare penny. When Michael needed guidance or comfort, it was always "ask your mother," as if parenting was exclusively my domain. Even after Michael married Rebecca and had Tyler, the pattern continued. I bought them a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood with my hard-earned savings from the food stall. I watched Tyler while they worked, prepared his meals, helped with his homework, and cleaned their home, all while Rebecca collected compliments for their well-managed household. "You know," Rebecca had once whispered to me conspiratorially while we folded laundry, "every time my mom visits, she always praises Michael for being such a responsible husband. She tells me I married the right man." She chuckled and added, "Of course, she doesn't know that it's all you. You're the one holding everything together." That moment should have been a revelation. but I'd simply smiled and continued folding. That's what good mothers did, wasn't it? Sacrifice without recognition, serve without thanks. The night I announced my divorce, Rebecca's true colors emerged in spectacular fashion. When I tried to leave, she grabbed my arm, tears streaming down her face in a perfectly timed performance. What about Tyler? Who's going to look after him now? What about his dinners? Are you really okay with him eating fast food every night? Her manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. She wasn't concerned about her son's welfare. She was terrified of losing her unpaid household manager. You're both in your 30s, I finally snapped back. Isn't Tyler your responsibility? I've watched you play this perfect daughter-in-law act for years. Aren't you tired? Because I sure as hell am. The look of stunned disbelief on her face told me everything. In all our years together, she had never once considered me a person with feelings, needs, or breaking points. I was simply a resource to be utilized, a prop in her carefully constructed image of domestic perfection. When I exposed George's secret family, Michael's reaction cut the deepest. Instead of feeling outrage on my behalf, he turned on me. "You're so selfish, Mom," he shouted, as police led him and George away after their front lawn brawl. "You blew this whole thing up just because you wanted a divorce. I know Dad wasn't great, but you two were together for decades. Couldn't you just keep it together a little longer?" Even then, facing the revelation that his father had betrayed us both for his entire life, Michael couldn't see past his own inconvenience, my pain, my humiliation. My 3 decades of silent endurance meant nothing. I was expected to continue suffering quietly so that his life could remain undisturbed. As I walked away from that house for the last time, suitcase in hand, I felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and liberation. The family I had devoted my life to had never truly seen me. But at 60, with a cancer diagnosis giving me precious little time, I had finally seen them and myself with perfect clarity. The cake said it all. "Congratulations, Tyler," in cheerful blue frosting, without a single candle, balloon, or hint that today was also my milestone 60th birthday. I stared at those 2 lonely words, feeling invisible in a room full of my own family. After 6 decades on this earth, 3 of them spent building and maintaining this family, I didn't even merit a mention on my own birthday cake. "Mom, what are you doing? Where's the lighter?" "Help me find it so Tyler can make a wish," Michael called out, completely oblivious to the pain squeezing my chest. I lingered over the open cake box, searching its corners as if I might discover my name hidden somewhere in the frosting, some small acknowledgement that I existed beyond my utility to others. "Did you go deaf?" He asked you to grab the lighter. "What are you standing there for?" George barked from the head of the table, already irritated that I'd prepared a feast without thinking to buy him wine. His harsh tone made Tyler look up from his plate. While Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, I swallowed hard, fighting the ache in my throat. "Michael," I said softly, "aside from Tyler's big day, do you remember what else today is?" My son's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "What do you mean, Mom?" The bewilderment on his face was authentic. He truly had no idea. Just days ago, I had specifically reminded him that my birthday coincided with Tyler's first day of 3rd grade. I'd mentioned, trying to keep my voice light despite the heaviness in my heart, that I was hoping for a proper celebration this time, to feel seen, to feel remembered. "She's always got to make things complicated," George growled. "Just get the damn lighter." Ooh. I glanced at Tyler's innocent face and decided against making a scene. What was the point? I'd long ago learned that drawing attention to my own needs only brought criticism and conflict. So I did what I'd always done, smiled through the pain, walked to the kitchen, and fetched the lighter. As I watched my family gather around the cake, George downing whiskey, Michael lighting candles, Rebecca filming on her phone, and Tyler bouncing with excitement, I felt like a ghost at my own birthday party. How strange to be physically present, yet completely unseen. The laughter, the cheers, the excitement, all of it flowed around me as if I were merely a piece of furniture rather than the beating heart that had kept this household running for decades. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing everyone's favorite dishes, crispy-skinned roast chicken that required constant basting, mashed potatoes whipped to perfection, baked mac and cheese with the special 4-cheese blend Tyler loved, and a garden salad with vegetables I'd personally selected that morning. Each dish was an offering, an act of love expressed through hours of labor. Yet when Michael had stopped by the bakery to pick up a cake, my existence hadn't even crossed his mind. It hadn't always been this way. When Michael was small, before Rebecca entered our lives, he would spend weeks planning my birthday surprises. I still kept the handmade cards in my bedside drawer, wobbly letters spelling "Happy Birthday, Mom" in crayon, surrounded by hearts and stars. One year, when he was about 8, he'd saved his allowance for months to buy me a small silver necklace from the discount jewelry store at the mall. I wore it until the chain broke beyond repair. What had changed? When had I transitioned from beloved mother to household appliance? Perhaps it had been gradual, a slow erosion of my personhood as I increasingly defined myself through service to others. Or perhaps it had been Rebecca's influence, her subtle reshaping of Michael's priorities to center around their nuclear family with me, relegated to a supporting role. The year Tyler was born, they'd remembered my birthday with a hastily purchased card. The year after, a text message sent at 9 p.m., then nothing at all for the last 4 years. Each forgotten birthday had stung. But I'd swallowed the hurt, telling myself not to be selfish, that being a mother meant celebrating others' joy, even when your own heart aches. But turning 60 felt different. 6 decades of life, with potentially very few left ahead of me. The recent cancer diagnosis, lurking in the background of my thoughts, had clarified everything. Time was precious, and I had spent far too much of mine being taken for granted. As Tyler made his wish and blew out the candles, everyone clapped and cheered. No one noticed the single tear I quickly wiped away. No one saw me quietly excuse myself to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection, silver hair, lined face, eyes weary from decades of giving without receiving. "Happy birthday, Eleanor," I whispered to myself, the only birthday greeting I would receive that day. When I returned to the table, my decision had been made. The forgotten birthday wasn't the cause of what followed, merely the final revelation in a lifetime of invisibility. At 60, I was finally ready to be seen, even if I had to leave everything behind to make it happen. The doctor's words hung in the sterile air of the examination room like an executioner's sentence. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. The cancer is advanced. Without aggressive treatment, you have approximately 6 months. 6 months, 24 weeks, 180 days. The remainder of my life suddenly had a countdown clock, ticking away precious seconds while I sat frozen, hands clutched in my lap, wedding ring glinting under the fluorescent lights. I'd gone to the hospital alone, not wanting to burden anyone with what I'd assumed was just another ache in my aging body. George would have complained about the inconvenience, Michael would have been too busy with work, and Rebecca would have made it about how my illness might disrupt their carefully scheduled lives. So I drove myself, parked in the far corner of the lot to save a few dollars on parking, and walked through those sliding glass doors with no hand to hold but my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 3 decades holding this family together only to face the end of my life in solitude. As I drove home from the hospital, the world looked strangely different. The maple trees lining our streets seemed more vibrantly green. The laughter of children playing in front yards more precious. The sunset more spectacular in its orange gold glory. Death has a way of bringing life into sharp focus, of separating what matters from what doesn't. Why should I be the one to pay for his sins? I whispered to myself that night as George snored beside me, oblivious to my tears or the terminal diagnosis I hadn't shared. Why should I keep breaking myself just to protect the fragile pride of a family that never saw me? That's when it hit me, a clarity so profound it felt like waking from a 30-year slumber. I'd been raised to believe that a woman's worth was measured by her sacrifices, that divorce was shameful, that enduring unhappiness was somehow noble. I'd swallowed these lies along with my dignity, convincing myself that silently suffering was a gift to my son. But what had all this silent endurance bought me? Disease, loneliness, a husband with a secret family, a son who couldn't remember my birthday, a grandson being taught that women exist to serve. To hell with silence, I declared to my reflection the next morning, studying the silver-haired woman staring back at me. To hell with sacrifice. To hell with pretending everything's fine. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. I had nothing left to lose. No future to protect. No reputation to maintain. No decades ahead to worry about filling with regret. 6 months. What would I do with 6 months if I truly lived for myself? The answer came more easily than I expected. I'd always loved dancing, though I hadn't done it since before Michael was born. Growing up poor meant dance lessons were an unattainable luxury. But I remembered how alive I'd felt, twirling barefoot in my mother's kitchen as a child, how my body seemed to understand music in a way my mind never could. At 60, with death's shadow lengthening across my days, I wanted to recapture that pure, unfettered joy. So I signed up for hip-hop classes, not gentle senior aerobics or dignified ballroom dancing, but actual hip-hop, with its energy and attitude and freedom of expression. The studio was filled with 20-somethings in crop tops and snapback caps who stared when I walked in wearing my modest workout clothes and supportive shoes. I ignored their barely concealed smirks and positioned myself in the back corner, determined to try despite my arthritic knees and limited flexibility. "You sure you're in the right class, ma'am?" the instructor asked kindly, giving me an opportunity to retreat with dignity. "Absolutely certain," I replied, meeting her gaze steadily. "I have 6 months to live, and I intend to spend them learning to dance." Something in my voice must have conveyed my determination, because she simply nodded and turned up the music. That first class was humiliating. I couldn't keep up, couldn't grasp the movements, couldn't stop comparing my stiff, aging body to the fluid grace of the younger dancers. But for the first time in decades, I was doing something solely for my own joy, with no thought of how it benefited anyone else. The unfamiliar feeling of self-prioritization was almost dizzying in its intensity. As weeks passed, I practiced religiously. Every morning before the house stirred, I would move the coffee table aside and work through the routines in our living room, repeating each step until my muscles remembered. The young dancers at the studio stopped snickering and started offering tips, occasionally even complimenting my progress. "You've got rhythm, Mrs. W." one tattooed young man told me after I finally mastered a complex sequence. Most people your age wouldn't even try, and most people my age weren't dying. I thought but didn't say. Most people my age hadn't realized how much of themselves they'd given away until it was almost too late. The night I finally walked away from my marriage, my birthday, the night of Tyler's school celebration, I knew with absolute certainty that I was making the right choice. Cancer had given me the most unexpected gift, the courage to stop waiting for a future that might never come, and to seize whatever joy remained in my numbered days. I had planned every detail meticulously. For weeks after discovering George's betrayal, I said nothing. I quietly gathered evidence, confirmed addresses, documented finances, and waited for the perfect moment to bring down the elaborate facade we'd all been living behind. That moment arrived on my forgotten 60th birthday. As my family sat around our dining table, celebrating my grandson's first day of third grade, oblivious to the earthquake about to shake their perfectly constructed world. I want a divorce, I announced, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside me. The words landed like a grenade, detonating the comfortable silence around our dinner table. George's fork clattered against his plate. Michael froze mid-bite. Rebecca clutched Tyler protectively, as if my declaration might somehow contaminate him. George recovered first, his face darkening with that familiar storm cloud of rage I'd weathered for 3 decades. "Have you lost your mind?" he roared, slamming his glass down so hard whiskey sloshed over the rim. "You're nearly 70, and you want a divorce now." I almost laughed at his exaggeration of my age, a small cruelty so typical of him. Before I could respond, Michael jumped in, predictably aligning himself with his father as he'd done since adolescence. "Mom, what are you talking about? We're all just trying to enjoy dinner here. Why ruin everything?" The genuine confusion in his voice cut deeper than George's anger. My son truly couldn't comprehend why I might want something for myself after 30 years of self-effacement. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight," I continued, refusing to be diverted from my course. "Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to sign the divorce papers, George." His face contorted with that ugly, arrogant smirk I'd grown to detest the look of a man who believed he controlled the narrative, who thought himself untouchable. "I'm not agreeing to this," he declared, pouring himself another drink with casual dominance. "Are you insane? You want to tear this family apart? Aren't you ashamed of what people will say?" It was the same emotional manipulation he'd wielded for years, the social shame he knew I'd been conditioned to fear. But terminal cancer has a way of putting social opinions in perspective. When you're staring down your final months, the whispers of neighbors suddenly seem remarkably unimportant. Rebecca attempted her usual peacekeeping performance, stepping in front of me with Tyler half hidden behind her like a human shield. "Eleanor, come on," she said with practiced gentleness, that pleasant smile still pinned to her lips. "We're family. Every family has its little rough patches. Why don't we just sit down and talk things through?" Then she leaned closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Didn't we agree not to bring up divorce again?" Her presumption that my silence after discovering George's affair constituted agreement was the final provocation I needed. "Well, I've changed my mind," I replied evenly. "After I divorced George, I don't want any of you contacting me again." Their collective shock at my resolve only strengthened my determination. For too long, they'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for passivity. They truly believed I would continue to endure anything rather than disrupt their comfortable lives. "What do you mean, none of us?" Michael demanded, blocking the doorway as I attempted to leave. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" His genuine bewilderment might have been comical if it weren't so tragic. My own son had no conception of me as a person with limits, with breaking points, with needs beyond serving others. When their attempts to manipulate me into staying failed, the mood in the room shifted from disbelief to hostility. They closed ranks against me, George, Michael, even young Tyler shoving me after I pushed Rebecca's restraining hand away. Their unified front of outrage confirmed everything I already knew. I was valued not for who I was, but for what I provided. "If you won't let me walk away in peace, then fine," I said, taking a seat in the center of the living room. "No one gets to walk away untouched. You like putting on a show, then I'll give you one." I turned to Michael, whose expression shifted from anger to confusion. "Let's talk about your father," I said coolly. "Did you know he has another family?" The words landed like a thunderclap. George lunged forward, grabbing my arm with panic in his eyes. "What the hell are you talking about? Are you out of your mind, saying this in front of the kids?" But it was too late. The curtain was falling on 30 years of deception. I laid out every detail: the other woman's name Susan, her address 113B Lincoln Street, apartment 302, the existence of Michael's half-brother 31 married, with a daughter. With each revelation, George's face lost more color, while Rebecca's panic betrayed her complicity in keeping this secret. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Michael, finally processing the magnitude of his father's betrayal, lunged at George. They fought on Susan's front lawn while neighbors watched and recorded. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as father and son were handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. Even then, even with the truth exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible, they found ways to blame me. "You're so selfish. Mom," Michael shouted through the police car window, "you had to burn everything down. For what are you happy now?" I walked away without answering, my back straight, my heart simultaneously breaking and healing. The truth had cost me my family, but for the first time in 30 years, I was no one's victim and no one's fool. With 6 months to live, I had finally found the courage to die on my own terms, rather than smothered by lies that had already claimed too many of my days. The first time I walked into Rhythm Nation Dance Studio, the youngest person there was at least 40 years my junior. Music pulsed through speakers, bass so heavy it vibrated through the floorboards and up into my sensible orthopedic shoes. 20-something dancers in trendy athletic wear stretched at the bar, their lithe bodies bending and twisting with casual grace. I stood in the doorway, a 60-year-old grandmother in loose-fitting sweatpants and a t-shirt I'd owned since the Clinton administration, clutching my membership paperwork like a shield. "Can I help you, ma'am?" asked the receptionist, her nose ring glinting under fluorescent lights. "Are you looking for the gentle movement class for seniors? That's on Tuesdays and Thursdays in Studio B." "No," I replied, straightening my shoulders. "I'm here for the beginner's hip-hop class." Her eyebrows shot up, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "Of course, you'll want Studio A. Straight through those doors. Class starts in 10 minutes. The instructor, a tattooed young man with kind eyes named Jaden, did a double take when I walked in but welcomed me warmly. "We've never had anyone over 30 in this class," he admitted. "But dance is for everybody. Just modify any moves that feel too intense." Okay. I positioned myself in the back corner, as far from the mirrored wall as possible. When the music started a thumping beat with lyrics I could barely decipher, I felt utterly lost. My body, accustomed to decades of kitchen work and childcare, refused to follow the quick, precise movements Jaden demonstrated. I caught glimpses of my reflection awkward, stiff, ridiculous. Some of the younger dancers exchanged glances and suppressed smiles. For a moment, I considered slipping out the door, retreating to the safe, invisible existence I'd always known. But then I remembered my cancer diagnosis, 6 months to live, 6 months to finally experience life on my terms. What did I care if 20-year-olds found me amusing? I might never see them again. I might not be alive next season. So I stayed, fumbling through every step, moving a beat behind everyone else, sweating more than seemed humanly possible. After class, my muscles screaming in protest. Jaden approached me. "You coming back Thursday?" he asked, no judgment in his voice. "Absolutely, Tilsey," I said, surprising even myself with my certainty. And I did come back Thursday, then the following Monday, then every scheduled class after that. I practiced at home in the small apartment I'd rented after leaving George, pushing aside the coffee table to create a makeshift dance floor. I watched YouTube tutorials, studied hip-hop documentaries, and immersed myself in a culture created decades after my youth by people whose experiences couldn't have been more different from mine. The first month was humbling. My body ached constantly. I couldn't keep up, couldn't remember sequences, couldn't master even basic movements that teenagers executed with effortless precision, but I refused to quit. Each morning, I woke before dawn and practiced, repeating the same move dozens, sometimes hundreds of times. "You don't have to get it perfect," Jaden told me after catching me practicing alone before class one day. "It's about feeling the music, finding your own style." "I will get it perfect," I replied stubbornly. "I don't have time not to." Slowly, imperceptibly at first, then with gathering momentum, I improved. My joints loosened. My reflexes quickened. My confidence grew. The same kids who had once giggled behind their hands started offering tips, complimenting my progress, even asking me to join their practice groups. The cool lady, they called me, a nickname that spread beyond our dance studio and into the broader community. A local newspaper ran a small feature about the hip-hop grandma in their lifestyle section. People began recognizing me at the grocery store, the pharmacy, the farmer's market where I'd once sold homemade pies to support my ungrateful family. 4 months after my first class, Jaden approached me with an unexpected request. "We're doing a showcase next month. Would you be willing to perform a solo?" Fear immediately clutched at my chest. It was one thing to practice in a class environment, another entirely to stand alone on a stage with all eyes on me. "I'm not good enough, I protested. "This isn't about technical perfection." He explained. "It's about storytelling. You have something these kids don't life experience. Emotional depth. Use it." So I created a routine that told my story, a woman constrained by expectations, gradually breaking free, finding strength in her own body, joy in her own movement. I practiced until my muscles memorized every beat, until the choreography became as natural as breathing. The night of the showcase, standing backstage in black leggings and a sequined top borrowed from a dancer 60 years my junior, I felt no fear. When my name was announced, Eleanor Wilson, performing Finally Free, I walked onto the stage with my head high. For 3 minutes, I existed purely in the moment, my body moving with a fluidity and power I'd never imagined possible at 60. When the music ended and I struck my final pose, arms outstretched, face lifted toward the ceiling, the audience erupted. Through the stage lights, I could see people on their feet, some wiping away tears. Later, a video of my performance went viral in our town's senior community. Suddenly, I was receiving invitations to teach dance workshops at retirement homes, to speak at community centers, to share my story of late-in-life transformation. The woman who had been invisible for decades had become, in her final act, impossible to ignore. What changed? A local reporter asked me after a community performance. Why start dancing at 60? I smiled, thinking of the cancer that had paradoxically given me life rather than taking it away. I finally realized that life isn't about enduring. I told her, it's about living as yourself. The funeral company's calls had become something of a dark comedy in my life. Every few weeks, the same polite voice would inquire if I was still with us, their professional concern barely masking their bewilderment at my continued existence. I had prepaid for my entire funeral service, selected an ocean burial for my ashes, and even recorded final messages, all while stubbornly refusing to die on schedule. "Hello, ma'am," said the familiar voice when I answered the phone that Tuesday morning. "It's safe to say you really don't need our services after all." There was a note of defeat mixed with genuine relief in his tone that made me laugh out loud before hanging up. He wasn't wrong. It had been 6 months since my terminal diagnosis, the very deadline the doctors had given me, and rather than weakening, I seemed to be getting stronger every day. My hip-hop classes no longer left me breathless. The chronic pain that had been my companion for years had subsided to a dull whisper. Even my complexion had a healthy glow that belied my 60 years and supposed imminent demise. It was time to return to the hospital, to face whatever miracle or mistake had extended my life beyond its medical expiration date. I drove myself to the same sterile building where months earlier I'd received what I thought was a death sentence. This time, I didn't park in the far corner to save on parking fees. Small acts of self-care I was finally allowing myself. The oncologist's reaction to my latest scans told me everything before he spoke a word. His eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline as he flipped through my results, his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally something approaching awe. "Mrs. Wilson, he said slowly, looking up from the file. "Your cancer cells are completely gone. No signs of metastasis, nothing." I stared at him, my heart suddenly pounding in my ears. "What do you mean?" "I healed, completely." He nodded, a smile breaking across his usually reserved face. "Yes, you're in remission, completely recovered. But this kind of illness doesn't just go away, does it?" The doctor gave a small shrug. "It's rare, but it happens. Some patients experience what we call spontaneous remission. You're not the first. Medical journals are full of cases like this." He handed me my chart and added, "Actually, a colleague of mine is producing a medical podcast and video series. He'd love to share your story, real patients, real miracles. You could inspire a lot of people. Would you be open to an interview?" Tears welled up in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from something far deeper: relief, gratitude, triumph. I nodded, smiling through the wetness. "Absolutely. I'd be honored. If my story gives even one person hope, then it's worth it." Walking out of the hospital that day felt like being born again. The world seemed sharper, more vivid, the blue of the sky almost painfully beautiful. The laughter of children in the nearby playground, a symphony. I had been given something few ever receive: a second chance after making peace with the end. With this unexpected future suddenly stretching before me, I faced my final piece of unfinished business, officially ending my marriage to George. Despite his initial refusal, he had eventually agreed to the divorce, likely realizing I wasn't going to back down, and returned to my role as his convenient housekeeping service. But I wasn't about to make this easy for him. After decades of deception, after stealing my best years for his double life, he deserved to face public consequences. "I'm not ready to sign anymore," I told him when he called pushing for the divorce paperwork. "Not unless, on the day of our divorce, you stand outside City Hall in front of everyone and publicly apologize for all the damage you've caused me over the years. You must also clear my name and tell the truth about all those lies your so-called true love spread about me online." He lost his temper immediately, cursing before slamming down the phone. I smiled at the screen as the call disconnected, knowing he'd come crawling back. He needed this divorce as badly as I did. His girlfriend, Susan, had become increasingly unstable since discovering our confrontation. Paranoid that he might reconcile with me after our 30 years together. 2 days later, he called back, agreeing to everything. The stage was set for my final act of reclamation. The scene outside City Hall unfolded with theatrical perfection. George, graying and diminished, stood before a growing crowd of bystanders and did exactly as instructed, apologizing for 30 years of betrayal, admitting to his secret family, and publicly acknowledging that Susan's online smear campaign against me was nothing but slander. People gathered, curious and surprised. Phones captured videos that immediately began circulating online, but George barely seemed to notice the public humiliation. He was in a trance, desperate to complete this performance and move on. What he didn't know was that I had arranged one final surprise. As we entered City Hall to submit our divorce paperwork, a woman in a fitted red dress appeared on the front steps. Precisely at the appointed time, George, emerging from the building with our completed forms, walked straight to her, taking her hand with practiced ease. Susan, who had been waiting anxiously nearby, went ghost white at the sight. The woman wasn't George's new girlfriend, as Susan assumed she was an actress I'd hired. The final touch in my elaborate plan to expose the true nature of the man I'd wasted 30 years loving. Susan lunged at him, sobbing and screaming, completely unraveling in public, while George didn't spare her a single glance. Standing there, watching the chaos I'd orchestrated, I felt no satisfaction, no vindictive pleasure, only profound relief. The divorce certificate I'd receive in 1 week wasn't just a legal document. It was my declaration of independence, my formal separation from decades of invisibility and deception. As I walked away from City Hall that day, for the first time in 30 years, I was nobody's wife, nobody's victim, and miraculously, despite all medical predictions, not yet anybody's memory. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold. But I had learned that revenge is actually most satisfying when it's meticulously choreographed, when every player hits their mark, every line delivers its intended blow, and the audience gasps at exactly the right moment. After 30 years of being a bit player in George's production, I had finally written, directed, and staged my own masterpiece. It began with a simple phone call to an agency I'd found through Carol Johnson, my only true friend who had helped me gather evidence of George's double life. "I need someone convincing," I told the woman who answered, "someone who can make a scene believable without overplaying it." The agency specialized in experiential acting services, a fancy term for hiring performers to create convincing public scenarios, usually for marriage proposals or surprise parties, occasionally for more unusual requests, like mine. They sent me headshots of several elegant women in their late 50s, all with the polished, affluent look that George had clearly preferred in Susan over my more practical appearance. I selected Patricia, a former theater actress with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of poised confidence that comes from decades on stage. Our planning session lasted 3 hours. I shared everything about George, Susan, their relationship, the confrontation at the grocery store, and the public divorce I had demanded. "So I'm the other woman," Patricia clarified, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "The mistress of a man who already has a wife and a mistress." "Exactly," I confirmed. "You need to be everything Susan fears younger than her, more sophisticated, more commanding, someone who makes her question whether she was ever special to George at all." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "And where does this performance take place?" "City Hall, the day George and I finalize our divorce paperwork. He's agreed to publicly apologize for his betrayal as my condition for signing. You'll appear as we're leaving the building, and he'll walk straight to you without hesitation, as if I've already been forgotten. And Susan will be watching," Patricia added, understanding immediately. "She follows him everywhere now." I explained. "Ever since she found out about our confrontation, she's been paranoid that he might return to me. I'll make sure she knows exactly when and where the divorce is happening." The day before our scheduled court appearance, I sent Susan a simple text message. "Tomorrow, 3 p.m., meet me at City Hall. Let's clear the air face to face." It was the perfect bait. She would never risk missing an opportunity to mark her territory, to remind me that despite 30 years of marriage, George had chosen her. George arrived at City Hall precisely at our appointed time, his face grim but resigned. He stood on the steps as instructed and delivered his public confession to the small crowd that had gathered curious passers-by, a few courthouse employees on cigarette breaks, and several people who recognized us from the grocery store confrontation that had circulated on local social media. "I apologize to Eleanor," he stated mechanically, using the speech I'd written for him, "for 30 years of betrayal, for maintaining a secret family, for misusing our family's resources, and for the emotional damage I caused." He went on, listing specific cruelties and deceptions as I had demanded, while phones recorded his confession and people whispered behind their hands. When his performance was complete, we walked into the building side by side, two people who had once built a life together, now calmly ending it on paper. The clerk explained we would need to return in a week to collect our official divorce certificate, and as we exited the building, the real show began. Patricia stood at the bottom of the steps in a striking red dress that accentuated her trim figure, her makeup flawless, her posture radiating the quiet confidence of a woman accustomed to getting what she wants. Across from her, Susan waited stiffly, her nervous fingers fidgeting with her purse strap, her eyes darting between George and me as we emerged, without missing a beat. George walked straight to Patricia, taking her hand with practiced ease and familiar affection. The stunned look on Susan's face was worth every penny I had paid for this performance. All the blood drained from her features as she watched the man she had stolen perform the same betrayal on her that he had once inflicted on me. Susan lunged at George, grabbing his arm in desperate confusion, but he yanked away with a flick of disdain and continued walking with Patricia, not even glancing back. Susan collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably, half screaming into her phone while cursing through tears the perfect picture of a woman coming undone. I strolled casually over to where she knelt on the concrete, stopped just in front of her, and gave her a light, almost playful smile. "So I heard you two were true love?" I asked softly. Her expression twisted instantly into rage, and she lunged at me again, but I sidestepped smoothly. letting her stumble past without so much as brushing my coat. "Damn, did you see that move? This lady's got some real fire," a bystander shouted, sparking laughter and applause from the small crowd that had gathered to watch the drama unfold. I turned and gave them a wave, grinning, before walking away with the graceful dignity I had practiced in front of my mirror for weeks. Later that afternoon, Patricia met me at a quiet cafe several blocks from City Hall. I handed her the final payment we had agreed upon in advance, which she accepted with a bright smile. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, tucking the envelope into her designer handbag. "If any of your friends ever need a similar acting service, feel free to refer them. We offer a discount for returning clients." I thanked her for her flawless performance, and we parted ways, two actresses who had delivered perhaps the most satisfying scene of our respective careers, within days. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that George had gone into a full-blown frenzy, trying to find the mysterious woman in red, even putting up missing person flyers around town. But of course, he never found her. She had been nothing more than an illusion, a mirror reflecting his own faithlessness back at him, just as I had been nothing more than a convenient prop in his decades-long performance of respectability. The difference was, I had finally written my own ending. A gentle knock on my apartment door interrupted my French lesson, a simple tap, 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 so hesitant I almost didn't hear it over Madame Rousseau's recorded voice, instructing me to repeat, "Je voudrais une table près de la fenêtre, s'il vous plaît." I paused the audio, curious who could be visiting on a Tuesday afternoon. Most of my new friends from dance class were at work, and Carol always texted before stopping by. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Rebecca. Gone was the immaculately dressed, perpetually smiling woman I had known for years. The person standing before me looked like a shadow of her former self. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, eyes ringed with exhaustion, wearing a plain sweater with a coffee stain on the sleeve. She clutched her purse strap with white-knuckled fingers, as if it were anchoring her to the earth. "Eleanor," she said softly, her eyes unable to meet mine. "May I come in? I'd like to talk." And for a moment, I considered turning her away. After all, this was the woman who had conspired to keep George's infidelity secret, who had manipulated me with my own grandson's well-being, who had treated me like a convenient household appliance, rather than a human being with feelings and needs. But something in her defeated posture stirred an emotion I hadn't expected, not pity exactly, but a calm curiosity. I stepped aside without a word, allowing her into the bright, airy apartment I had decorated entirely to my own tastes. No more of George's dark leather recliners or hunting prints. My space was filled with watercolors, plants trailing from macrame hangers, and comfortable furniture in shades of teal and cream. Rebecca glanced around, seeming momentarily startled by this physical evidence of my transformation. She sat quietly on the edge of my sofa for a while before speaking, twisting her wedding ring in a nervous gesture I recognized from our years together. "I want to apologize," she finally murmured, fingers still working anxiously. "I was naive, selfish. I thought as long as I was comfortable, nothing else mattered. I never realized just how much you'd been carrying all these years." I said nothing, just watched her, neither encouraging nor discouraging her confession. "All this time I thought I was a victim too," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "But now I see I was part of the harm. I was part of what hurt you." She looked up then, tears gathering in her eyes. "And now I'm living the life you once had, carrying everything alone. Michael. He's drinking a lot, shutting down, avoiding everything. He's turning into his father, and I'm the one left holding the pieces. her eyes filled with tears. I finally understand. Leaving wasn't selfish, it was brave. I sat there quietly for a long moment, studying the woman who had once been so careful to never show me her true face. There was no performance now, no calculated manipulation, only raw, uncomfortable truth. "You're finally the Rebecca I always hoped to meet," I said gently, passing her a tissue from the coffee table. We looked at each other and shared a small smile, not of friendship exactly, but of mutual recognition. Two women who had played different roles in the same dysfunctional story, now seeing each other clearly for perhaps the first time. A little over a month later, Michael appeared at my door. Unlike Rebecca's humble approach, he started with an awkward attempt to ask about my old illness, offering some half-hearted concern before gradually steering the conversation toward his own troubles. That's when I learned he was divorced. Rebecca had finally reached her breaking point with his increasing resemblance to George. "Mom, I know there were a lot of misunderstandings between us," he said, voice low and uncertain as he sat across from me at my kitchen table. He looked both older and younger than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture reminiscent of the little boy who used to hide behind my legs when meeting strangers. I gave him a gentle smile. "When I was younger, I used to think that enduring for others was a form of kindness, but I've come to understand that real kindness is loving yourself and not making others pay for your own cowardice. I hope someday you'll truly understand my decision." He lowered his head and sighed, a sound heavy with recognition. "Michael," I continued, using his name deliberately to ensure he was truly listening, "you're not a bad person. You've just never really grown up. You're not your father, sweetheart, and you never have to be. But now you need to step up. You have responsibilities. Your son and your family need you." He looked up at me then, eyes slightly misty, with unshed tears. I stood, walked around the table, and pulled him into an embrace. His arms wrapped around me tightly, and in that moment, I forgave him not for his sake, but for my own. Holding on to resentment would only tether me to a past I had worked so hard to transcend. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered against my shoulder, sounding more like the 10-year-old who had once come to me with scraped knees than the grown man he now was. "None of us do," I replied truthfully. "We just learn as we go. The difference is whether we're willing to face our mistakes or if we keep repeating them." As he left that day, promising to visit again soon, I reflected on the strange circle we had traveled. After decades of showing Michael and Rebecca what it meant to sacrifice yourself completely for others, my final and perhaps most important lesson had been showing them what it meant to honor yourself. In walking away, in refusing to continue the cycle of martyrdom, I had inadvertently given them both the opportunity to grow beyond the limited roles they had accepted. Whether they would take that opportunity remained to be seen. But standing in my doorway, watching Michael's car pull away, I felt something I hadn't expected: hope. Not for a return to what once was, but for something new that might be healthier for us all. Now, life has settled into a beautiful rhythm that feeds my soul. I attend hip-hop dance class every day, where the younger members affectionately call me their spirit coach, while I jokingly call them the extended version of my youth. And the small business I started is thriving under the capable hands of my younger team, allowing me the freedom to focus on myself for the first time in 60 years. I've embraced new passions with the enthusiasm of someone who knows the value of time, learning French in the mornings, capturing life through photography in the afternoons, and planning my dream trip to Europe next year. I can already imagine myself standing before the masterpieces in the Louvre, riding scenic trains through the Swiss Alps, and dancing freely in the streets of Spain without a single worry about what others might think. My most unexpected joy has been volunteering at local nursing homes, teaching rhythm exercises to elders who, like me, had long felt forgotten. Watching their eyes light up with each movement, seeing them rediscover their presence in the world, it's a feeling beyond words. My friends, if there's one lesson I hope you take from my story, it's this. You don't need permission to put yourself first. For decades, I believed that sacrifice was the measure of love, that my worth existed only in what I could provide to others. I swallowed my dreams alongside my dignity, convincing myself that silent suffering was somehow noble. It took a terminal diagnosis, the ultimate deadline, for me to finally understand that every moment spent diminishing yourself to make others comfortable is a moment lost forever. The truth is, no one will advocate for your joy if you don't. No one will create boundaries to protect your peace if you don't establish them yourself. Today, I look in the mirror and trace the lines time has etched into my face with gratitude rather than regret. Every wrinkle tells a story of survival, of growth, of finding the courage to begin again at 60. Remember, it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. The second act of your life might just be the most beautiful part of your story. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between pleasing others and honoring yourself? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if this message resonated with you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more authentic conversations about finding freedom at any age. Remember, the most powerful thing you can be in this world is unapologetically yourself.